Defensoría de la Niñez, as well as over 300 members of civil society. We compiled and analyzed a considerable volume of information, including that was provided by the authorities. We carried out 235 interviews with victims and witnesses of alleged human rights violations, and we had 60 interviews with police officers, medical personnel, and members of the judiciary, among others. The government fully cooperated with the team, and we were granted unhindered access to places of detention and hospitals. Allow me to explain you what we have found in this visit. I think you're not hearing me, so I'll speak louder. The demonstrations that have taken place in Chile since mid-October have multiple root causes, including social and economic inequality. The majority of those who have exercised the right to assembly during this period have done so in a peaceful manner. We have found that the overall management of assemblies by the police was carried out in a fundamentally repressive manner. The police used non-lethal force when demonstrators were peacefully, and apparently they did it with the aim of dispersing the demonstrations and preventing participants from arriving at the assembly point. As you may know, according to official numbers, 26 persons died during this period and 28,210 persons were detained, of which 1,615 remain in pretrial detention. The other ones are not detained any longer. The number of persons injured who have sought medical care related to the protest varies according to the sources. In our report, we range it going from 3,500 to 12,000. Based on the information we gathered, we conclude that from 18 October onwards, a high number of serious human rights violations were committed in many cities throughout the country. Human rights violations documented by OHCHR include the excessive or unnecessary use of force that led to unlawful killings and injuries, arbitrary detentions, and torture and ill-treatment, including sexual violence. In particular, certain human rights violations occurred recurrently in time and space, namely the improper use of less lethal weapons and ill-treatment in the context of detention. Less lethal weapons, in particularly anti-riot shotguns, but also tear gas, have been used in an indiscriminate, disproportionate, and sometimes unnecessary manner. The alarming high number of people that have had ocular injuries testifies to the situation. Today, we have a number of 345 persons with injuries to the eyes due to pellets. The use of pellets containing lead has been a main concern for us during the mission. The report refers to many cases of young people that suffered ocular trauma, including the case of Gustavo Gatica, a 21-year-old student who suffered ocular trauma on both eyes and became blind as a result. Our team met with the family at the hospital when he was going through surgery, trying to save one of his eyes. I insist on the ocular injuries because it's a very particular situation for the Chilean context. We also found many cases of indiscriminate arrest and detention, including of peaceful demonstrators and passerbys, which could be considered arbitrary in light of international human rights standards. We also found a recurrence of ill-treatment of detainees, mainly through severe beatings. We documented cases of torture, including sexual violence, simulation of executions, and threats that persons would be disappeared. Women, girls, and LGBTI persons suffered specific forms of sexual violence, including forced nudity. We found that serious cases of sexual violence were committed also against men and boys. For example, we had the case of Josué Maureira, a 23-year-old student who was sexually assaulted in the 51st police station of Pedro Aguirre Cerda in Santiago. He has been very vocal about the case, and the team also met with him to hear directly from him what occurred. We documented four cases of arbitrary deprivation of life and unlawful death involving state agents. In 2 of the cases, lethal force appears to have been used in the absence of any risk to the life of the military personnel. This contravenes international norms and standards on the use of force and could, under certain circumstances, amount to an extrajudicial execution. We found that police agents are the perpetrators in the majority of human rights violations reported during the context of the protests. Serious human rights violations, including killings and unlawful deaths and torture, were committed also by military personnel, primarily during the state of emergency. We found that young persons and adolescents constitute majority of victims of violations. They represent, young people, the bulk of the demonstrators. The student leaders and students have also been targeted and harassed regarding their role in the protests. We also found that human rights defenders, journalists, and health workers suffered restrictions in doing their work. I would like to particularly mention the cases of journalists Lucas Jara and Alejandro Torres, who were injured in the context of their work. Alejandro, a cameraman, lost his eye. He told me when we met, I hope I will be able to find a job after this. We observed also that there have been numerous attacks against the security forces and their premises. There has also been looting and destruction of private and public property. Very briefly, just some of the recommendations that we have in the report. Some of the recommendations we make are aimed at preventing that such violations occur again and to ensure accountability. Prevention measures to be taken in the short term are important as protests continues to take place in different places of the country, albeit of less intensity. And we continue to receive allegations of violations by police forces. The report recommends that the law enforcement forces strictly follow international norms on the use of force at all times. We recommend the immediate end of indiscriminate use of anti-riot shotguns to control demonstrations. The use of tear gas should be used when strictly necessary and never in the vicinity near education and health establishments. There are also a number of recommendations aimed at adopting structural changes vis-à-vis the police, including the need to ensure adequate civilian oversight and independent monitoring of their actions, as well as proper identification and training on nonviolent means in the management of assemblies, among other recommendations. We also recommend that all complaints of human rights violations are investigated promptly, impartially, and effectively, and that those found responsible are given punishments in accordance with the seriousness of the violation. We encourage all the actors to follow up on the recommendations that we're making in the report, as we believe they can support the prevention of further violations and create the conditions for a meaningful social dialogue. Our report is not an end in itself. What's going to be important is the action that follows after it. I'm happy to take some of your questions on the report. Thank you very
We'll
much.
take questions in clusters of 3, assuming 3 of you want to ask questions. Because it gives them more of a chance to think about the answers, and maybe one question leads on to another. So.
Yeah, Gabriela Sotomayor, Mexican journalist for Proceso.
Yeah.
So, you recognize the responsibility of the police in these attacks, but mainly, who is the main responsible? Is Mr. Mario Rosas, the leader of the Carabineros, or is the president himself, Mr. Piñera?
Okay.
Next. Yep.
Elena Rosa con Colombia Informa. Me gustaría saber si en el tema de tortura se hablaron de 2 centros de tortura clandestina en el metro Macerana, en el metro Las Parcelas. Me gustaría saber si pudieron ver eso y qué vieron.
Do we have a third question? Nope. Okay, we'll go for 2 then.
Okay, concerning the first question about the responsibility, we conclude that there is a responsibility of the police on the commission of human rights violations. As to the individual responsibility within the police, we cannot come to a conclusion. This is something that, as the investigations go on, because there are investigations are going at the moment in many of the cases, it will have to be established at national level. Our conclusion is that they are responsible, but we cannot enter into a decision of which is the individual responsibility. About your question about the clandestine torture centers in Estación Baquedano, we heard about it. The information was given to us, but we were not able to confirm that those centers existed.
Acerca de los hospitales,
Yeah, dale.
Acerca de los hospitales se hablan de organizaciones civiles están denunciando una falta de recursos para poder curar las personas que llegan, faltan materiales. ¿Y ustedes pudieron comprobar eso?
Can I answer in Spanish or in English? In English is okay? Okay. Okay, fine. We visited several hospitals in the different cities. What we realized that was happening is that suddenly the hospital was overwhelmed with the number of people arriving. So we observed that there were long lines and people had to wait in order to receive the adequate attention. We also heard from doctors that it implied a lot of stress because they were working extra hours. We didn't hear that material was missing, but it could be linked also to the excess number of people arriving to the hospital. So these I cannot confirm, but what we can definitely say is that there was a lot of people arriving to the hospitals.
Amongst the 7 regions you have visited in Chile, can you give us an idea of where you found the most human rights violations? Is there specific regions that were striking for you?
I appreciate the question because it's very interesting. What we found is that in the context of Santiago and Valparaiso and the big urban areas, there was a lot of injuries related to the anti-riot shotguns. Also probably linked that they're urban areas and there's more people attending the demonstrations. However, we realized when we met with victims from other regions that some of the cases concerning ill treatment and torture were tougher, were more severe. So I would say that both going to the north and the south, we found that particular aspect of more severity in some of the cases. But, for example, there were less people injured by anti-riot shotguns, by the pellets.
Anya?
Agnes Conor, AFP. You mentioned the responsibility of the police in general and the multiple violations of human rights. How do you explain that? Is it, if you have any indication about why this occurs, was it something that was gone out of the hands of people, or some responsible, or was it something more elaborated?
Concerning the injuries by pellets and the eye injuries, we think that it happened because there was an improper use of the anti-riot shotguns. That is a very clear conclusion. It was not used correctly. Otherwise, we would not be having this big amount of people that have been injured. In terms of other types of violations, it happened because if you think about how detentions take place, that the police that detains people, and there were a massive number of detentions. You know, we're speaking about more than 28,000 detentions. So violations that happen were also at the hands of the police because of the massiveness of detentions.
But when you talk about torture, sexual violence,
yes.
How do you explain that?
We think that the conduct of the police obviously was not the correct conduct. So certain things are completely prohibited in their protocols. For example, you know, what we saw, which is forced nudity, that it's something that is prohibited, was conducted both with women and men. So there was a responsibility also of lack of implementation of their own protocols.
And sorry, about the incorrect use of this
Improper use, yeah.
anti-riot shotgun.
Yeah.
What do you mean by improper use? They didn't know how it works? Or what
It was used in an indiscriminate way, and it was used improperly. What I try to say is that according to the rules, for example, when you shoot, you must have a certain distance, before shooting, and it has to come at the very end. You need to use other means before using anti-riot shotguns. We know, for example, that other means were not used because we asked many of the demonstrators how they were injured, and we asked, did they, for example, give an advice or give an announcement saying that they were going to begin the dispersion? This did not happen, so it was improperly done. And then it was done in an indiscriminate way, because when you shoot at a crowd and you don't respect the distance, you create more injuries. And that's why we concluded that there were so many people injured as a result of the indiscriminatory and improper use of some of these weapons.
Isabel Saco for Spanish News Agency. Given the extent of the cases of torture and ill treatment, would you say that it appears to be like a systematic use of torture, or would you these categorize as isolated cases?
The terminology we have used, as you will see in the report, is serious violations of human rights. And in some particular violations, we have said that they are recurrent. And the recurrent concerns the use of the anti-riot shotguns, the improper use and indiscriminate use, and the ill treatment. There were more cases of ill treatment than torture and sexual violence that we found. So I would say that the description that you're looking for is recurrent. What we say in Spanish, because it differs a little bit, it's grave y reiterado in some of the violations.
How do you explain these injuries in the eyes? Precise. I mean, is this a new kind of pattern that you saw, or why? Because it looks like very directed.
We didn't think, I want to say this, that there was a direct intention to shoot at the eyes. We continue to say that the use of the anti-riot shotguns was undue and indiscriminate, and that's why so many injuries were produced. However, the reflection needs to be made why this has happened in Chile compared to other countries which have had similar types of conflicts. Our explanation is that something went wrong on the use of the anti-riot shotguns. It's very particular, this type of injuries, because they are very serious. I mean, losing an eye is not like losing a finger. The consequence for the person is dramatic, you know, not only at the moment, but it has implication also for many other rights, you know, like the example I was referring of the cameraman, and he was telling me, I wonder if I'll find a job after. So the implications are very serious. We met many people that had suffered injuries to the eyes. The majority, I want to say this, the majority produced by what is called the rubber pellets, so los perdigones de goma, which at a certain moment, as you know, they were very questioned because of the composition of that perdigón de goma. But lately we begin to see also, particularly because on 19th November, there was a decision by the chief of police that the use of the anti-riot shotguns was going to be stopped unless there was a risk for the life of the police officer. So this has begun, we believe, to be reduced a little bit, but now we begin to see as well people that are injured on the eyes due to tear gas canisters. So our reflection is, and this is what we refer in the report, is that the means are being used improperly. And that's why we're ending up with this type of injuries.
And looking forward, I mean, for accountability, the leader, the chief of the Carabineros, Mr. Rosas, recognized the responsibility, and they say that they're gonna, you know, do the trials. But what, in your view, has to happen?
Going forward.
Yeah.
There are many things that have to be tackled, and these are part of the recommendations that we have on the report. First of all, people that go to a demonstration, they have to be able to demonstrate peacefully without a risk. Yeah? It is also true that there have been acts of violence and looting, as I said, but the fact that there are acts of violence doesn't take away the right of the other people to demonstrate in a peaceful way. And this has to be clearly understood. The second thing is that certain measures need to be taken at the level of the police, particularly concerning structural reforms of the police, because obviously what has happened shows that some changes need to be made. And for example, we refer to the importance of ensuring civilian oversight and independent monitoring over the activities of the police, including transparency. We also recommend that they are provided with state-of-the-art training on nonviolent means, that there are guarantees of proper identification of police officers, because what we observed is that at the very beginning of the crisis, the police officers had an identification, but as we moved on time, the identification was gone, or they had general identification, general names, which makes more difficult to identify. And we also think that there should be internal regulations in the police concerning protection measures for particular groups, no? For example, persons with disabilities. In addition to this, and going forward, obviously, a very important aspect is that all the cases need to be investigated, and those that are found responsible need to be punished with adequate sanctions according to the gravity of the violations committed. Now, this by itself doesn't change the reality that the country has a structural situation that is related to the lack of implementation of economic, social, and cultural rights, and a chronic social inequality that needs to be tackled to avoid that this is being reproduced or that this continues. So in the recommendations that we make in the report, we refer to the need to establish a follow-up mechanisms for these recommendations, and also a particular mechanism to look at all the ground causes that have caused this situation.
The delay that you took for the press conference and to send all the information, make me think about that you have been under pressure. Has been the case under pressure of the Chilean government, of the Chilean mission here in Geneva?
No, normally when we do these reports, I mean, you see them from the other side, but to do this type of reports, it takes a lot of time. We have to go through a lot of clearances process, so it's relatively, from my perspective, is relatively normal. What I do want to say is that we did have a very good cooperation of the Chilean government, and they opened the doors and they provided the information when we required.
And what's related to this apparent illegal detention centers that we say that exist?
Yeah.
So did you ask, or was the mission interested to visit these centers, or you didn't have the time to?
We received the information, but we were not able to visit.
But because you didn't have the time, or because the conditions were not?
No, because we did not go and visit, or we received contradictory information. We were not able to verify the information.
Maybe a question on the number of police officers injured according to the official numbers that you mentioned.
Excuse me, just could you repeat the number of the detained people that are still detained?
The last figures we have, I think that in pretrial detention there is 1,610, I think.
Okay,
but all these numbers are in the webpage of the Minister for Justice, and they are public, huh? Yeah.
You say that the Ministry of Justice figures say that there are 4,900 people
Yeah.
injured, including 2,800 police
Yes.
officers, which is more than the majority.
Yes.
More than that.
Yes.
Is it a figure that you have been able to confirm, such a high number of police officers injured? And if yes, how do you explain this?
Yeah. Those are the official numbers, and you see a difference between those official numbers between the injured police officers and the civilians injured. But I just want to say that this is a source of information. If you look, for example, at the National Human Rights Institute in the country, which verifies information. What I mean is that they go and see people in the hospitals. They have verified up to the 6th of December that there are 3,449 persons injured. 3,449. These are people, civilians, that they have gone and seen, so they know for sure that they're there. So you also already see a discrepancy in the figures. Then if you look at the figures of the Ministry of Health, the figures are much broader. They refer to the number of persons that were that visited the hospitals in the context of this crisis, and the numbers that are much higher. So what I'm trying to say is the numbers of injured people have to be taken, with a little bit of caution. and look at the different sources. That's why in our report we refer to the different sources of information concerning those that have been injured.
Any last questions from anybody? No? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Emma. I think that was very
Pleasure.
clear.
Thank you very much.
Pues, ¿podemos hacer alguna pregunta?
Ya.
¿Contestan
¿En español? ¿Sí? ¿Podemos?
We could maybe have some answers in Spanish now, if that's...
Sí.
Well, now that
Yeah,
Sí.
yes,
it's over.
okay.
Yeah.
Pues, lo mismo, nada más. Bueno,
Sí.
ven.
¿Así o
I
al
think
revés?
it's a good idea. You can always have a
Okay,
mini...
okay, sí, no hay problema. Okay.
Bueno, porque lo que pasa es que la tradición...
Speak up, because they're still filming.
They're still filming. Okay, sí.
En español.
En español,
La tradición
vale.
chilena de democracia,
Ujú,
pues sí ha sido un ejemplo para América
Ujú,
Latina,
ujú.
a raíz de todo esto del acuerdo de la
Ujú.
izquierda, de la
Sí.
derecha. ¿Qué pasó? O sea, se olvidaron de preguntar a la gente, de incluir a la gente en sus reclamos. O sea, estos 30 años más o menos que pasaron, ¿qué fue lo que explotó?
Bueno, una de las cosas que nosotros vemos en el informe, que lo explicamos, es que la causa de base está relacionada con esta desigualdad social crónica y la falta de implementación de los derechos económicos, sociales y culturales, pero también hay otro aspecto que se analiza, que ha sido la falta de participación democrática diversa de otros grupos. Por eso, de lo que nosotros hablamos en la recomendación cuando decimos que apreciamos, que celebramos que se haya llegado a este acuerdo histórico para el desarrollo de una nueva Constitución, decimos que es muy importante que el proceso que se inicie sea un proceso participativo e inclusivo que incluya a los diferentes grupos sociales para que sean parte de este proceso. Entonces, es efectivamente un tema que a lo mejor era parte de la problemática de por qué todo estalló, digamos, ¿no? Porque parecía que no se veía venir que el problema podía llegar.
¿Faltó algún control mayor del presidente Piñera hacia los carabineros? O sea, que cometió un error o por esta, no sé, fuera de control de la violencia, fuera de control parece, ¿no? En las manifestaciones. O ¿quién aquí es el más responsable, ¿no? De esto?
En realidad es un poco la respuesta, ¿no? que le hemos dado antes, ¿no? Nosotros vemos que ha habido una responsabilidad a nivel del cuerpo policial, pero sobre la responsabilidad individual esto lo tendrán que ver los tribunales. Efectivamente, si han habido políticas, se tendrá que ver, y los responsables de mando tendrán que también ser traducidos en justicia, pero en principio nosotros no hemos identificado específicamente responsabilidades.
Con esto, bueno, ya que estás hablando de temas de responsabilidades, uno de los temas más grandes utilizados en las organizaciones civiles en Chile, que se ve en la justicia, es el tema de la impunidad. Se habló del tema de la impunidad cuando se habla del tema de responsabilidades, de que las responsabilidades serán asumidas, sobre todo después de que se hizo ese acuerdo por la paz social y la nueva Constitución, y si también hablaron del tema de la impunidad y de eso adentro de los acuerdos que se hizo.
Eso lo vimos nosotros porque hubo una declaración del presidente, no recuerdo exactamente el día, si fue el 17 de noviembre o el 14 de noviembre, donde hizo referencia específica, y eso fue una evolución que nosotros vimos porque es el primer momento en que vemos una declaración en que se dice no habrá impunidad. Entonces, bueno, esperemos que eso se cumpla. En estos momentos lo que vemos nosotros es que hay muchas causas que están en investigación. Creo que nos referimos en el informe a 2.600 o 2.640 o 2.700 casos. Hay también sumarios administrativos a nivel de carabineros. A nivel de militares hay, por los casos de muertes, ya 3 militares han sido identificados, pero hay investigaciones en curso.
Okay, I think we'll end it there. Thank you very much indeed, and for your patience, and apologies again for the delays at the beginning. You do now have electronically English and Spanish versions of the report itself, and English and Spanish versions of the press release.
Gracias. Es obligada a hacerla. La alta funcionaria chilena.
You're doing it in here, no?
Ella
So
tuvo,
you have to say
se
basta.
mantuvo